welcome to another episode of Is It Just Me? The podcast that's dedicated to your unpopular F1 opinions. I'm Jess, and once again, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Luke. Luke, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jess. Thanks. Getting through lockdown as best possible. I've not resorted to spending thousands of pounds on a new simulator rig or shaving my head just yet. So I think I'm holding up about as well as can be. But getting through the break without racing. How have you been finding it?
Yeah, not too bad. I think you're probably the only person that's not invested in like an expensive sim rig or shaved their head for charity. But I
Yes,
seem
yeah.
to
I'm going to see how long I make it.
I seem to be just getting tagged in a lot of 5K running challenges, which I'm not a runner by any stretch of the imagination. So it's been an eye opener. But heading into today's episode, I've got a feeling we're gonna fall out
Yeah,
today, Luke. We've been
yeah.
so civil, we're so we're friends, but I don't know how much longer we're gonna be friends because today's theme is one that kind of got both of our backs up, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And I think this is when we talked about the idea of this podcast and what we wanted to talk about. This was one of the big ideas that came up very, very early on, and both of us disagreed very, very early on in that conversation. So I think it's going to make for a really interesting debate. We've had some amazing involvement from fans on social media, sending in lots of hot takes, lots of unpopular opinions. That's what this show is all about. So I think it's going to make for a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So this week's episode, we're talking overrated F1 circuits. So the tracks that you think should be put in the bin and taken off the F1 calendar altogether. Now, when we put this out for responses about overrated F1 tracks, I don't think we quite thought there are so many that people think are rubbish. I thought it'd be the classic ones, and then there were just others that popped up out of nowhere where I was like, how can you hate Monza? Like that's ridiculous. Like
Yeah,
Monza's
I know.
brilliant.
I know. Monza's amazing. It's one of my favorites. Canada got a mention as well. And I'm like, that's one of the best races guaranteed every single year. And I don't think there was a single Grand Prix that didn't get mentioned in one way. So I think that really shows just what an opinionated community I think we have in Formula One. It's fantastic.
And it just goes to show that F1 are not going to be able to keep everyone happy because
No.
someone out there is always going to hate on one of the best tracks on the grid, or on the calendar. But we picked an unpopular opinion in particular because it encompassed both tracks that you and I can't agree on whether they should stay or whether they should be kicked off. So that was a tweet from @Smidge Senior, I'm guessing, @Smidge SR, who said Monaco and Silverstone should be removed from the calendar. Now, that's a tweet and a half, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. There's a lot in that. I mean, we are talking about the two most historic races in Formula One history. Silverstone, that's where the F1 Championship started, all the way back in 1950, and then Monaco. You think of Formula One, you talk to I think anyone, even if they don't follow F1, they're just a sports fan or a member of the general public, and say the Monaco Grand Prix, Formula One, they'll probably put those two together very, very quickly. So, the idea of a calendar without either of those two races, that is a very, very spicy take.
But we've been polarized on this tweet because we each have taken the side of one of the circuits and not the other. So we always, when we were putting this podcast together, we always thought, oh well, to make it work, are we going to have to be for and against one of the things? And I don't think we have to be, but for this one, we very much are. So I am my agreement is that Monaco. And if you followed me on social media before, you know Monaco is the one track I think that is just there because it's Monaco and everyone likes it because they get to hang out on yachts whenever they get to go out there. But for me, it is just massively overrated, and there's just in modern day F1, I don't think there's a home for the Monaco Grand Prix. So that's where I'm at. I think, I understand that for the drivers, it's the one that they always come out saying it's the most technical, difficult. They've got to be on the edge of everything from the minute lights go out to the minute they finish even a session, because if they're not careful, they will put it in the wall. And I think, as F1 fans, it's brilliant to see drivers on the limit. But if we're thinking about the series as a championship and in terms of racing, as a fan, you don't get the spectacle of Monaco. Sure, I know what the arguments are. I mean, I will let you jump in, Luke, because I know that you are chomping at the bit about this. But
I'm holding back.
yeah.
I'm holding back.
Yes, the swimming pool section is amazing. Yes, it's awesome to see a single lap shootout on a Saturday. But then when we get to Sunday, it's just a procession. And what is F1 if on a Sunday you've got no action? That's my argument.
Yeah, I think, and I will acknowledge those points. I think that's a very fair argument. I think that the race itself on a Sunday can be very disappointing a lot of the time, and we do hear the drivers kind of talking about after the race saying they would, like, particularly the leader, they were trying to go as slowly as possible while still going quickly enough to keep the lead, which is a very sort of backward way of thinking about it. Because yeah, we want to see these drivers pushing flat out, lap after lap, going to the absolute limit, and we don't get that at Monaco, and I'll be the first to admit that. Qualifying is I think one of my favorite days of the entire season. You see them pushing to the limit, going right up against the walls. I'm thinking the exit of swimming pool when you there's that one camera shot where you see the car sort of rubbing up against the barrier, and that's incredible. That is the lengths that they are going to, putting their cars on the line just to find that extra thousandth of a second that can make all the difference in Monaco. So for me, that is what I love about Monaco. It is the absolute ultimate challenge for these drivers. They have got to be so mentally on edge all the way through that race to make sure they don't put it in the barrier, let alone try and overtake any other cars or anything like that. I think that's one reason for it. I think in terms of the processional nature of it, I think a lot of that is not a Monaco problem. It's more of an F1 problem. I think it is that if we had a different specification of tire, for example, tires, not a very exciting thing to talk about, but it is so important for Monaco especially that the drivers don't want to do an extra pit stop because it is going to cost them more than it would at other circuits. So I think that's something that F1 has got to look at itself. Like, ultimately, if they had tires that were more suitable maybe for Monaco, we wouldn't have this same kind of procession. The drivers would be able to push qualifying laps, lap after lap, in race trim, which would be really, really awesome to see. I mean, I love it for that. And I also love that it is just that unpredictable nature. I mean, we a couple of weeks ago on Autosport Plus, we looked back at the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix where we had 3 cars get to the finish, and that kind of thing just doesn't happen at other circuits. I also think back to 2014 when Jules Bianchi fought his way through to finish 9th for Marussia. Like, again, that kind of thing just doesn't happen at other tracks. So I think it's that kind of magic of Monaco that I just love. And I know it's a very privileged thing to say, that to be able to go and stand trackside at Monaco, to stand at the exit of the swimming pool and see the cars coming through that corner. But yeah, that to me is just a mind-blowing thing. So yeah, Monaco for me very much has to be staying on the calendar.
You're getting all nostalgic, aren't you? You're getting a bit
I am. A little bit misty-eyed.
Now, and I'll admit, I've never been. I have never been to the Monaco Grand Prix. I've been to Monaco when there's not been a Grand Prix on, and it's a strange place.
It's a weird place, yeah. Even for Formula E, I went there. It's very, very quiet, and like, yeah, you just kind of think it's all these empty apartments that people aren't living in. It's very, very strange.
But to come back, I do agree. I agree to you to a point. You know, it's kind of not Monaco's fault that it doesn't produce good racing. But I guess my argument is that unless you can, there's 2 sides of it, right? You either change the layout and use a different part of the city, if that's even possible, to then have, I don't know, create a different overtaking area. But that's going to take a lot of planning. And if you've ever been to Monaco, it's still very old. It's got higgledy-piggledy streets, and the layout that they've got is pretty much the only layout that they could use. But so you can't make the track wider, you can't add in any areas really. So the only option, surely, if you want to keep Monaco on and have it being exciting, is to change the cars, because the cars are too wide. But you brought up the 96 Grand Prix, but surely that was more to do with the reliability of F1 in that era rather than the fact that Monaco produces these unpredictable races, because 9 times out of 10, you can predict who's going to be on that top step based on who's going to be fastest in quali. So it's just that's for me that just doesn't sit. And I think it's the fundamental flaw of street tracks, right? I mean, I like the idea of street tracks. You know, I like the fact that a series like Formula E relies on them because it brings motorsport to the people, makes it more accessible. You know, it's right on your doorstep. I mean, some people do complain because it causes a lot of blockages if you're not into motorsport, but hey, we'll not listen to those people because motorsport's brilliant. But you are then, and it's kind of an argument that people find with Formula E, is that the racing is just not competitive because you're doing 90-degree turns all the time, and there's not much you can do to change that. So, and there, you know, you talked about Bianchi fighting his way up, which was, yeah, that was a fab performance. But you know, last year we had Germany that provided all the chaos and mayhem, and Brazil that provided all the chaos and mayhem with unexpected people. And the other argument, which is also a street track, is that Baku provides us with the mental chaos. But in the same breath that I'm saying that, last year's race at Baku wasn't that interesting, but you know, 2 out of 4 have been bloody bonkers. And it's got that amazing straight where you get brilliant overtaking opportunities. And that, for me, saves it. Because whilst it is a bit formation, especially through that castle section, it's got that going for it that Monaco just doesn't for me. And the glitz and the glam of it all just doesn't give me enough to say, yes, I'm a fan of Monaco.
Okay, I think again I can see that, and I think Baku. I think you're very right that it's that amazing straight and that final sector that gives it that sort of high speed element that ultimately Monaco doesn't have. Monaco can't have because of just where it is in the world and because of the track layout and things like that. And I agree that if they could make changes to that, it would probably become a better race and maybe a bit more entertaining. But I still think there's enough that it is a race that it can still produce drama. It can still produce these great battles. And I mean, I think back to I think it was the 2011 race when we had Vettel, Alonso, and Button all sort of pushing lap after lap after lap, trying to catch each other. And there was a red flag, and then they had to go again and have a restart. And it was just incredible. And that kind of race, yeah, okay. A race like Germany, a race like Brazil, we see that kind of drama happen, which is amazing. But I mean, I can think of examples for both of those Grand Prix where they were disappointing affairs. I mean, look at the French Grand Prix the last couple of years. That's been a really, really difficult race and not one that I think many will look back on fondly. So I think that, yeah, maybe it's a luck of the draw that, okay, Monaco is probably going to get a smaller percentage of those absolute mind-blowing races like 96, for example, where you get a freak result and it's just incredible to watch. But I still think that we can really appreciate the challenge of fighting around that circuit, of what the drivers are putting themselves through, of how they've got to be so careful with those cars. And I think it's still more than worthy of a place on the calendar. I think it's just a race that really does have to be protected.
Fair enough. Should we see what the fans thought? Because obviously this was all about what the fans had to say. So we've got a tweet from @FrankTrek23 on Twitter who said, "I love its history and legend, but Monaco should be a non-championship race because of how predictable it is." Now, I've seen that take quite a lot actually, and we have had a video in from a fan who has quite a interesting take on what we should be doing with Monaco. Should we take a listen?
Deserves to stay on the F1 calendar, but it should be in a different format. Because by removing Monaco, you're taking away the most challenging and exciting and exhilarating qualifying session of the season. There is no track that poses as much of a challenge to the drivers as Monaco, and the cars going at such a high speed through the swimming pool chicane is just such an amazing spectacle. So, yeah, on the flip side, the racing definitely is quite boring because obviously the cars are way too big for the track and it's almost impossible to overtake. So what I think they should do is just have no race entirely. So instead of having the practice, qualifying, and the race, they'll still have practice on Friday, but then qualifying on Saturday, which gives half points, and then another qualifying session on the Sunday, which gives the other half points. So I think that you get to keep Monaco with all of its history and just how unique it is and how much of a destination it is in the world. But then you won't have those processional races, which usually are quite boring. But you still get the amazing spectacle and challenge that qualifying in Monaco brings.
So that, I guess, almost feeds into what you were saying, Luke, in that qualifying is your favourite. That Saturday qualifying at Monaco is your favourite part of the season. So why not just have it as a qualifying round of the championship and forget a race, because it's just not built for racing, is it? What do you think?
There. Like you're basically offering me my favorite day of the year twice. Like, I mean, no, you can't have qualifying without a race. I mean, the whole point of qualifying is that you want to be on pole position. You want to be leading that pack into Sunday Vot. And I think, you're there. People tune in for qualifying. They love it. It's amazing. But it's that risk factor. It's the idea that even if you're starting like 5th, 6th, 7th, wherever on the grid, 14th in the case of Olivier Panis, you go into that race day at Monaco thinking, I've still got a chance here. And I'm sure every single driver on that grid thinks, if a few crashes happen up ahead and I can maybe pit my way through a little bit of rain, I still have a chance of winning this race or being on that podium. And I think that's the kind of element of surprise that means, I think it's still got to be a race. I like the idea. That's a really interesting idea. And I think Lewis Hamilton, he's spoken in the past about maybe some different formats needed for F1 and suggested that Monaco, maybe that's a race where we could do that. Maybe have a qualifying on a Friday, on a Saturday, then you have a normal race. And then how about on the Sunday, you reverse the top 10 positions like in F2 or something like that. Might that be a way to spice things up a little bit more and have these faster cars coming through the pack? Potentially. But I think that, no matter how good that qualifying session may be, you need to have a race at the end of it.
Okay, well, I feel like we're just gonna have to agree to disagree with this one.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I feel like all arguments are pretty up there. I totally understand your points, and I'm sure the day I get to attend the Monaco Grand Prix, it will become my favorite Grand Prix of the entire season. But until that day comes, I am still firmly in the stop being nostalgic, stop being so sentimental about it. Stop being so luxury and F1 is a VIP event about it. Make it about the fans. Make it about the fans that are sat at home, that don't get to be there and experience that, and choose a track that's got some decent racing. But that's just my take. The next one, and I genuinely, when you told me that this was your opinion, I was actually pretty shocked. But Luke, you think Silverstone is overrated? Tell us more.
I do think Silverstone is overrated, and I put out a tweet. I know. I put out a tweet yesterday on social media saying, tell us the overrated tracks, just to get responses so we could see what fans were talking about. And I actually had a couple of colleagues message me and go, I'm not going to say this publicly, but privately, Silverstone, I think it's a bit overrated. So I'm gonna take
names.
that risk.
I'm gonna hunt them down.
No. I'm gonna say, Silverstone, I think it is overrated. Now, look, I love the British Grand Prix. I love that F1 has its roots in the UK. I love that I think we've got 7 of the 10 teams have got bases in the UK, and it's something lovely about going to that racetrack. There is, like, I've been there for F1, I've been there for touring cars, and it's always get a bit, I don't know, feel very British about it when you go through those gates and think, I'm going to have a jolly good day here, and it's going to be a good day out. And that I love that. And I do like Silverstone. But it is, for people who say it is the highlight of the season, that is when I really get quite confused, because it is a track that has lots of history. Don't get me wrong. As we said at the start of this podcast, the very first F1 race was held there in 1950. But over the years, and particularly since my time working in the sport over the last 8 years or so, I've really struggled to go to Silverstone and come away thinking, oh, that was an amazing race, or I can't believe that happened today, or whatever. Ordinarily, it turns out to be a fairly processional affair, which is something that, Monaco gets criticism for, and it may not be to Monaco levels, but I still think it's fairly early on what's going to happen. I think back to 2018, that was probably the only British Grand Prix I've covered that I was like, oh, that was a pretty good race, actually. And that was only because of a late safety car that set up a late battle, and we had Lewis Hamilton coming back through the pack. But otherwise, I really don't get the buzz about it. Like it's a very cool track. It's high speed. It's exciting. Maggots and Beckett's, which is something that a lot of people defending Silverstone said, like, how can you hate a track that's got that? And that's a lovely complex of corners. But I just Monza has, or even Monaco, to be honest. Like it's a very nice track. It's good, but for me, the British Grand Prix, it's just not. I don't get all the hype around it, and if that makes me slightly unpatriotic, then I apologize for that. But that is my very controversial opinion.
But I guess that is an argument, isn't it? It's like, is it just because we're British that there's no reason why we should be pro Silverstone if we don't think it's a good race? Because I mean, we've got some brilliant tracks. We're very lucky in that, as you said, like motorsport was very much a part of our industry historically, and that's pretty much why all the teams are based where they are based, because that's where they've always been based, or that's where they needed to amalgamate. But we're blessed with quite a lot of other tracks that, you know, have maybe once or twice held a Grand Prix in the past, or have been hinted at replacing Silverstone. But there's a lot of people on the fans as well that agree with you. So at Ant, and these are all usernames that I'm going to mispronounce, so I apologize, but Ant Colano on Twitter says, my spiciest take is Silverstone, especially after 2010. If the track was in a country other than Britain and didn't have its history, a lot more people would agree. So that's definitely harking back to the fact that just because we're getting a bit nostalgic and bleary-eyed about the fact that the first ever Grand Prix was held there, then that gives it its seat. Now, I understand that, because I guess that's the exact argument I've used against Monaco. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and say heritage means everything to Silverstone, but I don't know. There is something about Silverstone. I mean, last year's race was a belter. I mean, it wasn't the best race of the season, but it was up there. I would say it was top 3.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. I would say it's top 3. That, you know, the Mercedes battle, you had Leclerc and Verstappen. It just had it brought out so many on-track battles that for a lot of the other Grand Prix had been won in strategy, which I guess is another thing where and obviously this is a totally different discussion point, but I think why a lot of F1 fans, or like casual F1 fans, turn off is because they don't understand, like, sometimes a strategy play can be just as exciting as an on-track battle. But that for me is the bit that gets people really invested. Like, being able to see drivers go wheel to wheel is just fabulous to watch. And I got that from Silverstone last year. Like, I got goosebumps from Silverstone last year. I thought it was a brilliant race. But you know, not everyone agrees with me. Should we take it to a voice recording that we got from fans as to why it's crap? Let's start off with why it's crap, and then maybe why it's not crap.
Hi guys, it's Adam here. I think that Silverstone is probably the most overrated track on the calendar. Despite being British and all the connotations that come with that I should love it and love Lewis Hamilton and stuff like that, I just think it's probably one of the worst tracks out there. It's expensive, it's difficult to get to unless you live in England, to be honest. And when you're expected to go there, you're expected to love Lewis Hamilton, and as a Haas and Roman Grosjean fan, I can't stand Lewis Hamilton. I think he's just really annoys me. But in terms of the racing at Silverstone, you rarely get a good race. Like, unless it rains, which, okay, it does sometimes, you really get a good race. Personally, I'd rather spend my hard-earned cash going somewhere abroad, like Austria or Hungary, like I've been, because at least then there's lovely cities around it. Silverstone, as far as I'm concerned, is just in a field.
Well, there you go. Adam is very much against Silverstone. But he raised some good points, right? He raised some points about, you know, it's one of the most expensive races to go to as a fan on the calendar, which has always boggled my mind a little bit, considering, you know, it's I mean, the places that we travel to in F1, you would imagine that they would be more expensive, but this one, Silverstone, is spendy for a fan, isn't it?
It is, yeah, very much so. And I talk to fans who might go to Spa or Austria, as he said, and they're tracks that they can make that weekend cheaper than if they went to Silverstone, which really doesn't make any sense because it is the home Grand Prix. And I think another really excellent point that you raised there about the accessibility. Now, obviously, whenever we travel to an F1 race, the majority of the tracks are near a major city. So you can fly into a city and then it's maybe like an hour tops to get to the track. And Silverstone is, again, for us, home Grand Prix, it's a little bit different. But for, I think, of other teams, drivers, journalists, people who travel from overseas to get to Silverstone, it's a little bit more difficult to get there than I mean, what we find at a lot of other countries. And that is why, like, when there was talk of a London Grand Prix, I was all over that, like all about that, because it was, I just thought, a really great way to have something that's in the heart of the city, to still make it a very British affair, very good for the country, promote what we do for motorsport in this country, but while having that sort of extra edge and make it a city race and make it really, really easy to get to. We've got Formula E, obviously unsure what's going to happen this year, but there are hopes that we'll get the race at the XL Arena at some point in the future. And that kind of thing, that's brilliant. Like, that's what we want to see, something that's really in the cities, easy to get to. And I think F1, if they ever could get a London Grand Prix off the ground, I think we saw with the fan festival they did a few years back, that really showed the interest that's there. So I think if they could ever tap into something like that and get a Grand Prix to happen in London, for me, that would be the best of all worlds. That would be a really fantastic project to put together. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I can definitely.
But Luke, are you saying, Luke, that you basically want to replace Silverstone with another Monaco? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I would replace Silverstone with a city circuit.
But I mean, let's get down to it. I mean, this is again probably another subject for a completely other podcast. But I don't know the last time you went to London, but you know, the roads aren't exactly wide enough for an F1 car or a modern day F1 car. So essentially, you are potentially pitching another Monaco scenario where a race is going to be won on a Saturday. Are you not?
Potentially, but again, you have all that drama. It's a street circuit. Anything can happen. We've seen in Baku, for example. That's a city you go to, and well, they couldn't do a Grand Prix here. And as you said yourself, Jess, 2 out of 4 times Baku has delivered. So I think there's a real. I think a London race would be so cool. I would love to see that. Honestly, ideal world, we could maybe have Silverstone plus a London race. But when there was sort of a bit of uncertainty about where the British Grand Prix would be going in the future, and they said, might not be at Silverstone anymore, I was like, yeah, I could live with that, to be honest.
Oh, I would definitely be disappointed. So I'm going to call in some backup. I found somebody who agrees with me.
Are Monaco and Silverstone overrated? No. Well, Silverstone isn't. Racing is absolutely incredible there. Doing a lap around there is incredible. Watching from the track is incredible as well. There is nothing about it which would say overrated at all. It is the quintessential F1 circuit. Monaco, though, very processional. It is very much... it's a very difficult argument to be made as to whether Monaco should be on the F1 calendar or not, because it doesn't really fit the regulations that make up most F1 tracks. Any other track that would conform to the sort of standards that Monaco does would never make it onto the F1 calendar in a million years. That being said, it is obviously very special to a lot of drivers. So I would like to make a case for perhaps Monaco being a non-championship scoring event held after the end of every season, a bit like Macau for F3. The Monaco 100 laps held at night, like on the F1 games. But yeah, to round this off, Silverstone's not overrated. Monaco is special, but yeah, it doesn't lend itself well to actual racing, unfortunately.
Wow, I got myself some like proper backup there. He was backing up both my points, but that was quite a controversial thing he said about Monaco. Not to jump back to Monaco, but a Monaco 100 at night. Someone's been playing the F1 game too much, don't we think?
Maybe, but I mean, Jess, how would you like to sit through 100 laps of the Monaco Grand Prix? Could you do that, do you think? Oh, no. There we go.
No, I would go for 2 qualies. I'd go for 2 rounds of quali, but No, I'm not sure about that. Although at night would be carnage.
That would be really cool. That would be really, really cool.
That would be carnage. But interesting that you made the comparison with the Macau Grand Prix in Formula 3, because having like that as an individual event actually works quite nicely in that series. But it's always that worry, isn't it, of having anything that's a bit gimmicky in F1, or that takes away from the main championship series. It's an interesting concept. It's quite a, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds a bit like a Bernieism, don't you think? Like something that Eccleston would have suggested if he still had the reins. But well, no, because he blooming loves Monaco, doesn't he? Because that's where he makes all his money. So it is an interesting take, I think. But back to Silverstone, I think there is something to be said about it for an event as an F1 fan. I liken it a little to Spa. From a fan perspective of attending, I think you're right. It's not the easiest place in the world to get to, but neither is Spa, right? Spa, you're usually driving through Europe, which, okay, for a lot of Europeans is pretty standard and easy to do. But where are you going to stay? You have to stay in a field. Like that is pretty much the only way to do Spa is to stay in a field. Or if you're very lucky, you've found you're staying in one of the villages, kind of half an hour, 45 minutes out from the track. But then you've got to get into the track, and Spa is busy for a fan. Like it's you're talking, you have to be at the track for 6 a.m. to get yourself a seat if you don't have grandstand tickets, which is brilliant. And I love that part about Spa, because I've always said Spa is a proper fan track. Like it's a down and dirty, raw, no frivolities about it. It's like anti-Monaco, right? It's that pure rough and ready side of F1, which is brilliant. And I feel like Silverstone is a more civilized version of that. It's like, if you want a camp, have at, the campsite they've got on location pretty much is its standalone festival, which I think is brilliant for fans. It's such a fab experience if you get to go and experience it. You can stay in camper vans, or you can go stay in Oxford or Northampton or wherever. And okay, yeah, it's another drive to get in there, but it's not impossible. And you can, it's accessible. But yeah, I think again, like we're just going to have to agree to disagree with this one. So we're going to leave
I think
it.
so.
Let's do a poll. We should do a poll on this and see what people think. Which, if we have to bin one of them, do we bin Monaco or Silverstone? And then we'll see which one of us wins.
I think that's a good way to do it. Okay.
Who has the backing of the fans? That's what I want to know. But coming back to the original tweet you put out, we just wanted to kind of give nods to other tracks that fans thought were overrated.
Yeah, and I think one of the ones that I was really surprised by, and you mentioned earlier, was Monza. So many people coming online saying Monza's overrated. We had a tweet in from at Rulamo. Purely from racing and track perspective, Monza produces mostly pretty boring races with little chance of an upset. But of course, it deserves to be on the calendar because of the history and atmosphere. Again, I'm not going to bang the drum for history because it was that argument that I've said that doesn't wash with Silverstone. But I mean, or Monaco. But think about last year's Italian Grand Prix, that fight between Leclerc and Hamilton. I mean, that was amazing. And that's the kind of thing that Monza, pretty much year in, year out, it delivers. We have these amazing high-speed battles, and that's what we want. And I mean, Monza, to me, I just love that race. The atmosphere, I mean, Silverstone, I'll admit, has got a very, very good atmosphere. But Monza, you look at that main straight after the race, all those Ferrari fans under the podium. I mean, that's a real sight, not just in F1 that is special, but I think all of global sport. It's really incredible. So, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on Monza? I mean, surely that's something we can agree on.
Oh, 100%. Like Monza for me is, so I've always said that there's an F1 trifecta that all fans should try and get to if they can. And that is Spa, Monza and Silverstone. So I know you don't agree with my third and final option, but I've always said that those, if you get to experience 3 Grand Prix in your life, those are the 3 that you should aim for. And Monza for me as well, again, like I've been very lucky that I've been to a lot of these tracks as a fan first, and then very fortunate to be then working at them. But Monza just has that, there's just something about it. I can't even put my finger on it, but you're right. I mean, watching the cars fly through there, like it's because they are going so fast. It's like the quickest circuit on the calendar. but you don't. But they're not like restricted. They're not. They're not. They are pretty much on the limit. And one of my favorite parts actually is the fact that how many drivers miss that first corner and go through the little zigzag runoff. Because they're pushing so hard that they often overshoot it and have to go through the escape road. So and the Tifosi, I know we can't really. I do understand that. It's not always about atmosphere, because you can't always experience atmosphere through a telly if you're watching from afar. But I think it's palpable. The atmosphere at Monza is palpable from watching on a TV screen, because the Tifosi are just insane. And the drama of, it's just got everything for it to me. It's got the history, it's got the atmosphere, it's got the racing. You mentioned last year, the year before, 2018, when Ferrari looked like they were going to win it for the first time in, what was it, 10 years? And not quite 10 years. How long was it? I can't do it.
8 years. 2010 would have been the last
8
one.
years. Yeah. Alonso, wasn't it? He was the last Ferrari winner at Monza. And they had it right there, and they threw it away. And it's just, that's pure F1 soap opera. It's just, and I just don't think you quite get that at a Monaco, or dare I say it, even at a Silverstone. You don't quite get that same level. But I will say it, yeah, I'll probably stack Monza higher than Silverstone on my list. But yeah, I can't believe people don't like Monza. I'm just like, you just clearly don't love F1. No, I'm joking. You're allowed to not like these tracks. I guess that's the brilliant thing about F1, is that you don't have to like it all, but that's okay, because there's something there for everyone, and you're not going to love everything. So that's a brilliant one. So the next one is quite a trigger point for a lot of people, I think. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I'll say a bit of a point for me as well, because it's Suzuka. Now, Suzuka is a track I adore. I went there for the first time in 2017, and it just changed. It changed all of my outlook on racing. Like I went there, and just everything from Japan itself as a country is incredible. The fans there are just absolutely unique. They're just one of a kind. And then the circuit itself, I mean, everything from that first sector, the S's going up the hill, then into the Degners, then they go under the bridge, and then they're into Spoon, and then through that final sector and 130R. It's just fantastic. But again, people were tweeting
one-handed, because apparently.
Oh yeah, exactly. Just no biggie, no biggie. But again, people were tweeting saying that Suzuka's overrated. We had a tweet from at Brad State 93 said Suzuka 2 overtaking places at best. 130R is now the equivalent of a straight. First sector and most of the second is single file.
I mean, I guess to a point, he's got a point, and we have seen just how difficult it is to overtake. Vettel had quite a hard time. What was it, 2018? He had a pretty hard time trying to get around there. Had a few collisions. Now, whether that was to do with his mental state and panicking towards the latter half of the season, or whether that was to do with the layout of the track, I don't know. But we've also seen some very good moves through that same section. So what do you think about overtaking at Suzuka?
Now, this is one that when I first saw those tweets come in, I was like, that's outrageous. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, actually, it is very difficult. Like, you don't have many Japanese Grand Prix that are like really, particularly nowadays, that can really look back on and say, oh, that was an absolutely iconic race. Obviously, you look back to 2005 when we had Kimi making the last lap pass on Fisichella to take the win. That's one of the most dramatic finishes to an F1 race in F1 history. But then I think, over the past sort of 4 or 5 years or so, there's not really been many massive drama points that you think, oh, that made it an iconic race, that made it a really standout one through the entire season. So
here's a challenge for you. Kieran Davidson on Twitter says, name me one good Suzuka race from the last 10 years. Can you name 10 or one? Actually, he's only asked for one. Name one.
Damn. That's a really good question. I need to look at that.
Point proven. But I guess the whole point is, and I think this is what a lot of people actually on Twitter did end up saying, is that, and a lot of people pointed out about Monaco, are we asking too much for every track to be giving us absolute classic racing? Is that the problem? Are we just not? Can we not be satiated for our desire for absolutely off the wall racing? And should we just be accepting that some of these tracks are just all right,
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it, I think, ultimately. And I think we look back through the early races of last season, and everyone said, oh, it's really boring. Does F1 need changes? And it was purely that we just had a run of races that there just wasn't a lot going on. It was that the competition there was too much of an imbalance. The Mercedes were just that far in front. But then we had a string of like 8 or 9 races in a row that were absolutely amazing. So I think that shows that it can be a very fickle thing, I think, whether a race is good or not. And ultimately, in football, you're always going to get a 0-0 draw every now and then. In F1, every now and then, you're going to get a bit of a dull race. And I think the only way to get around that would be if we did go down a gimmick kind of route. If we did say, okay, let's put in reverse grids, or let's put in joker laps or something like that, which, okay, there may be a very strong case for. But I think that may infuriate the purists more than it would be worth to, I think, spice things up a little bit and try and sort of force every single race to be a classic, because that's just simply not the way it works.
I think it's always been my argument, and I'm this is what I'm hoping for the new regs in 2022, because obviously we've got a year delay now on those coming into effect, is if we're going to continue racing where we're racing, then the cars have to be built to suit the tracks that we're racing on. And be allowed to overtake and to have overtaking and as you said, not only that, but the tires have to be suitable for it as well. So I'm not going to blame the tracks as harshly as I think as maybe we could be lent to. I think, the sport has to fit where we're choosing to race, because it's a physical race, right? We can't, as much as we've had some esports on the go at the moment, racetracks are physical places, and it takes a lot of investment to change those. And whilst you could argue as well, it's not very cheap to keep changing the F1 regulations, I'm not sure if and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm totally saying this from an outsider's perspective, I've never felt like the F1 regulations have been put in place to specifically looking at the tracks that we're racing on and the calendars that we're racing on. And I might be completely speaking out of turn there, so don't take my word for it, but that's the attitude that I'm getting, because we just keep having a lot of the same tracks producing relatively rubbish racing. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think that is a really, really fair point. I think it is a case of that the cars and sort of the regulations they're written to technically, that comes first, and then it's okay, what tracks are we going to put them on? We've seen lots of new tracks join the calendar in the last few years. I mean, since the last regs came in 2017, we've had France join. We're meant to be going back to Zandvoort. We've got Vietnam. Then these are events that you would hope that if the decision is taken to go there, it would be with this current formula in mind, and it would be thinking, right, how suitable are these cars for these circuits? Zandvoort, for example, I think that was the case. They went to Zandvoort and said, look, if you really want a Grand Prix, you need to make a lot of changes. You need to do lots of alterations to the track. But even talking to Max Verstappen in Australia, and said, well, what do you think? And he said it's still going to be exciting because there's not much runoff area, similar to Suzuka. So it will punish those errors. But in terms of actual overtaking and what it can do for that, I think that's a more difficult one. So yeah, I really do hope that as we look forward, particularly at a time when Liberty say, look, we want to put more races on the calendar, we want to get to a 25 race season in the future, that it is a case of doing it with the product that is going to come in for 2022 in mind, saying, look, these are the cars, what tracks are we going to have and what spec do these tracks need to be to encourage good racing and make sure that the cars can go around there properly. So I think, yeah, it's hopefully something they do have in mind for the future, so we can ensure that we get fewer of those 0-0 draw style Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And speaking, I think the one thing I want to end this podcast on is track. And I think personally for me, this person sums up the Melbourne track currently probably better than I probably could.
Melbourne is the worst.
Yeah, we can leave that one there. No, I'm joking. I think Melbourne obviously has its advantages as well as its disadvantages, but I think for an opener, it's quite a disappointing race for most. Do you not agree?
I think, yeah, it maybe lacks some of that absolute out-and-out drama that we want to see from that first Grand Prix of the year. A few people on Twitter yesterday, they're making the point saying, but it is like a test session for the teams. They have only done their teams through testing, and they need to put them in race trim for the first time in a real life situation. And that's the first opportunity they get. So that maybe comes into it a little bit. But I do agree that, again, you think of classic races in Australia, maybe sort of early part of the 2010s, it was good. Through the refueling era, there were a few more interesting races. It's been a little bit more difficult, I think, in the current regulations. But again, F1 are sort of flexible. They've said that it's a possibility that there may be layout changes in the future, that they could do some things to encourage more overtaking, make it a little bit more exciting. But I think it's a very fickle thing. It is that, I mean, look at Valencia, for example. That was a street track that was widely panned and criticised. And it wasn't until the final year that we got one of the best races, I think, of the entire decade. And that is, again, purely just because of the circumstances that came into play at the time. So, you never know. We may get some weird factors that come in and really do spice up an Australian Grand Prix. But, I think I would agree. Maybe not quite as strongly as that voice note. But, Melbourne is an overrated Grand Prix track.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I feel like we could be sat here talking about every single individual track in detail and the pros and cons of it. So I think we'll leave it there for now. But we really want to know, all this podcast is totally about what you guys, the fans, think. Do you agree with what we've said? Do you disagree with what we've said? We want to hear it all. So make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you're leaving comments below this video. If you're listening to podcast platforms, definitely tweet us, either Luke and myself, or send some notes to @Autosport, who are producing this podcast, and let us know what you think. And make sure you are looking out. Every episode, we will be asking you to come join us, like you have heard on the podcast today. We want you guys, the fans, involved as much as possible. So make sure you're sending us your hot takes, your unpopular opinions, and we will discuss them on this show in future episodes. If you haven't already and you've liked what you've heard, make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and you're hitting that subscribe button on your podcast players. And you will hopefully be listening to us next week, where we will be taking another one of your unpopular opinions to pieces. But that's all from us. I'm Jess.
I'm Luke.
And we'll catch you next time. See you later.